Welcome back. You're watching a special in-depth look here on The Fix into gender-based violence with me, Karima Brown. I'm in conversation with Professor Pumla Dineo Gqola and Vanita Daniels. Before the ad break, Vanita Daniels raised the question about good men and what makes a man. Now, Pumla, we have seen many posters, adverts and men saying real men don't do this, real men don't do that. I have a really big problem with that notion of, what is a real man. To what extent does masculinity in South Africa need to be deconstructed and almost recalibrated for us to actually get to the root of gender-based violence, but also what's in it for men to uphold a patriarchal system?
I think you're absolutely right. Much of the noise, as you called it earlier on, around condoning gender-based violence, condoning violence against women and gender non-conforming people and children, is often framed around notions of real men. Real men don't perform or don't rape. Real men need to step up and protect women and children. Not in our name. Do not inflict violence on our women. And the problem with the framing of these narratives is that they use the very patriarchal language that makes gender-based violence possible as a way to undo it. And this cannot happen. So when we're thinking about the fact that we are socialized into gender, we have to think about the fact that men and boys, children, are socialized to become boys and men as well. And to think about violence, smaller, mundane forms of violence as not violence, as just part of being a man. And in fact, it's important that we not think about violent men as monster men, but to think about the way in which socialization into manhood is in many ways socialization into violent manhood. And if we're going to understand that people are socialized to think about commenting on women in public spaces, for example, and still harassing women in the streets and pretending that this is flirtation, part of what we need to do is to then take the responsibility using some of those institutions like schools, like churches, like universities, to teach against violence, to teach against patriarchy. Because when we fail to teach against patriarchy, we then try to use patriarchal language, which makes violence possible as a way of undoing patriarchy. And therefore, we're then trapped in this perpetual system where we're talking about our women, but the language of our women is implicated in thinking that you can comment and stop women that you don't know in the street to ask them, where are you going when they're running or jogging in the streets, commenting on their bodies, expecting, feeling entitled to their time. And it's not possible for those ideas of what a man is and how a man behaves that make violence possible to undo violence. And so we do need to have a very fundamental conversation about what kinds of masculinities need to have a place in a society that is against violence, in which violence against women and gender non-conforming people and children is not possible.
So, Vanita, let me bring you in here. You posed the question that society needs to answer. What is a man? If we are to tell the education system to deal with that question by way of socializing children, if we are to tell the schools and the churches and other institutions, how would they have to go about addressing this? And more importantly, is this even possible given the fact that when you introduce anything to do with gender in schools, you often face a backlash from teachers, from religious institutions, and from parents from the same communities that march in the street against rapists and people who beat up on women and children. And yet those are the same communities that often give institutions hassles when we have to deconstruct these very important constructs that shape the way in which children see themselves and grow up.
No, it really has to be a multi-pronged approach in terms of how we deal with this question, because it is so, you You can ask the school system, you can ask religious institutions, but we also need to look at families and what we are teaching our children in the homes. So when we assign certain tasks only to the boy children and assign certain tasks only to girl children, and we raise our children in a way that says, girl children are here to serve, girl children are here to nurture, and boy children are here to protect and to be strong. And so that's where the conversation becomes skewed right from the beginning. And, you know, it is, I don't even know how to explain how frustrated I am when the exact same institutions who are condemning gender-based violence are the ones who are protesting against teaching our boy children and our girl children how to grow up to not inflict violence on each other. And we, you know, one of the things that we've been calling for has been behavioral change programs. And it's not about having talks. It's about actually dismantling systematically all of these little blocks that we've put in place to ensure that this patriarchal society continues to thrive in the way that it's currently doing on the backs of the broken bones of women, gender non-conforming people and children.
Professor Gqola, let me bring you in here. This idea that men who rape, men who hurt women, men who are involved in gender-based violence are just mean, they are monsters, is a very handy straw argument, because you can just say they're bad people and you can separate them from the rest of society. Explain to us why it's important to dismantle patriarchy. Why are men enforcing patriarchy? What do they gain by a patriarchal society, and what do women lose in such a society?
Patriarchy is a system of power, and so it advantages and it values men. And it gives men who are it rewards men for being patriarchal, for requiring compliance, for being protectors and figures of authority. And it teaches men that to get this, you have to ensure compliance. It also teaches women to expect compliance and to defer to men. It gives men both symbolic and actual and material power in societies. And it is relentless. And I think it's very important for us to keep going back to the notion that men are taught to be violent men and that the system is relentless. So when we talk about families, very often I happen to be a parent to boys as well. And it's very interesting that we often talk about the socialization of children in the home. Yeah. And I think part of the work that we have to do is to also unteach children some of the relentless messages that they get from outside the home about what it is to be a proper man. So I'll give you a quick example. So when one of my sons was 2, we at the Pick and Pay at the till. Yeah. And the number of times people would say, but why do you put this child why is he wearing a yellow tracksuit? Yeah. He looks like a girl, and you're just going to make him gay. And it's this kind of relentless commentary by that assumes that there's a proper way to be masculine, and an improper way to be masculine. That is a problem, and that work is not done by monster men, whoever the monster men are. Those actions that enable violence are in the everyday interactions about the policing, and that is part of what we need to teach against. And that is why we need a multi-pronged approach. We need a system that shifts attitudes. We've seen successes with this with HIV. Those of us who are old enough to remember when HIV first entered our consciousness and people were being killed for saying they're HIV positive, to a place now where the stigma has not completely gone away, but it's waned significantly. And we need to teach actively against gender-based, against patriarchal value systems, and we cannot afford to start with femicide and rape when we do so. We have to start with these ideas around compliance, around part of being a man is being able to terrorize others into being proper women and proper men, and in fact saying those are the only genders possible.
Vanita, I'm going to give you the last a word in this segment. The question around shifting the needle on behavior change is, of course, very difficult. It's easy to say, bring back the death penalty, throw them in jail, don't give them bail. And some of those things might be right or wrong, but it doesn't do anything for how a man feels entitled to beat his wife because he paid for her when they got married, and to dismantle those cultural mores that socialize men is, of course, the hard work, and that's also where you get the resistance, particularly from institutions that are regarded as powerful and quite influential in our society. What is the conversation that we need to be having with those institutions? We saw, for example, the South African Council of Churches had a day of silence, and they protested last Sunday at their churches. But what do churches, mosques, synagogues, temples, traditional leaders have to do in order for men to stop thinking that they are the caregivers and the protectors and own women in real terms?
I think it's important, particularly for religious institutions. You can't have this double speech. You can't have a day of silence. And I saw some of the footage, and, some of the language was so problematic in terms of our woman and protecting this and protecting that. And you have this incongruency, because on the one hand you have this loud condemnation and the noise that you were talking about earlier on, and then on the other hand, in practice, for instance, at a wedding ceremony, you have a pastor preaching about women being submissive to their husbands, and so you can't have both. You have to be able, as the professor said, we have to dismantle these blocks. We have to change the narrative, and you can't start at the point of rape and murder and femicide.
Absolutely. Vanita, thank you so very much. That's Vanita Daniels from Rise Up Against Gender-Based Violence, and of course also Professor Pumla Dineo Gqola. She's the author of several books on gender and rape. Thank you so very much. Coming up after the break, does the criminal justice system impede or enhance the struggle against gender-based violence? Don't go anywhere.